I remember in my head, I kind of doing the math as well and thinking, okay, well, I'm probably going to be single for like a couple of years and healing. And then I might meet someone, but then I'm probably going to be dating them for a couple of years. And then we might, get engaged or get married if I can ever go through that again. And then, we're going to wait a couple of years and maybe have a kid. And in my head, like the timeline was so pushed far out. And the only comfort I really had, I remember, was talking to a couple of friends, like colleagues, work colleagues, who were in California at the time. And two of them were like, I was previously engaged. I called it off. It's not a big deal. And I was like, oh, wow, there are other people out there like this.
I am so excited to welcome our next guest, Katarina, to the Quiet the Clock podcast. We had an incredible conversation a handful of weeks ago, and I know that this episode is going to add so much value, and there's going to be so many amazing takeaways for our audience today. And I don't know where to start because we have so much to talk about. I want to talk about your work, but I also want you to share your personal journey. And because it's so relatable to all of the topics that we talk about on this podcast, it's so relatable to the women and probably men that listen to this podcast. But you had shared with me your personal journey of having a sort of picture perfect life that checked all the boxes. And it internally, you kind of knew something was wrong, and you took a lot of sort of like risks and leaps and courage to like find your authentic self and what really made you happy. So maybe we could start there with your personal journey and then move into your work, because I definitely want us to talk about your work here too.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. So, where to start? I think one of the things that got me to where I'm working today is how common the story that I have is. So I spent my teens and my 20s being an ultra high achiever, working really hard, getting good grades, blah, blah, blah. I had the fair share of ups and downs. Like I had anorexia when I was a teen. I think a lot of women do. And discovered therapy and personal development and became a bit of a self-help junkie, doing all the reading and listening to all the podcasts and everything. And again, I was such a high achiever throughout my 20s, just kind of building my career and getting onto the property ladder in my late 20s and moving countries and like switching jobs all the time and whatnot. And I think I always figured, because I'm this self-help junkie, I love reading, I love, all the big thinkers out there. I've had therapy for so many years. And I was pretty successful in other areas of my life. Like my career was going relatively well. Classic millennial, I was job hopping like a lunatic, but it was going well.
It's so funny how that has changed. I remember, my parents' generation, even what was messaged to us was like, you don't do that. Like you stay at the job, you stay at the job for years. And then it was like, it shifted a little bit. It's like you at least stay 2 years. And now people just change jobs like so frequently.
Yeah, totally. I was that person. But things were going well. And then when I got to my late 20s, I'd obviously been dating around and I'd had long-term relationships. But in my late 20s, I was like, okay, now is the time that I'm ready to settle down. I remember my best friend asking me like, are you ready? Are you ready to settle down? And I was like, yeah, no, I think I am. And I kind of got into that mindset of now is the time. I'm approaching my 30s. Now is the time. And so I did what most women my age are doing. I went on Bumble and, I went on with kind of, at that point, like not determination, but an openness to meeting, quote unquote, my one. And I did, to an extent.
And sorry to interrupt you, but how old were you at this time?
28. I was 28. Yeah.
It's so interesting to think about. And I know we'll get into this, is like, what is informing the readiness? Like whose message is it, right? Because like you said earlier, like, the checking that we said on our early card, checking the boxes and who's telling us like we're ready and it's time. And I think societally, like that is the time to start thinking about meeting someone you're going to marry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. Like I think everyone back then was like, in your 30s, your fertility starts to drop and blah, 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 blah. And so met the guy and had a really lovely picture perfect dating period and things were going well and it was all unfolding. And I remember being so happy that I'd kind of found someone who ticked all my boxes and seemed like such a good fit. And yet at the same time, I was chronically anxious throughout the whole time. But I didn't know that was a sign that something was off. To me, I was like, well, I'm the product of divorced parents and I've been in therapy a lot. So maybe it's me. Maybe I'm anxious attachment. Maybe I've got my own issues. Maybe I've got fear of commitment. I don't know. And so I kept going to therapy and I kept kind of, not masking it, but like processing it and unpacking it. And then I kept going ahead. And before I knew it, I was engaged and we had this lovely big wedding planned and everything was, again, picture perfect. But I knew, and I think he knew as well, internally that it wasn't the right thing at all. And
When did you start to recognize that maybe that anxiety was telling you something different, right? And it sounds like you tried to process it in a lot of ways, but maybe also rationalize it to mean something else. And was there a moment when you realized anxiety was telling you that this was not right, even though externally it looked quote unquote perfect?
Yeah, I think it was like every couple, we would have our arguments, and I started to have panic attacks, like really, panic attacks. And I've never had that before. Like that's not me. And so my body just kind of began to give me signals. And yeah, it became very clear that this isn't the right fit. There was obviously more to the story, but obviously I want to kind of keep the integrity of his name. So I realized kind of 2 years down the line, or 2.5 years down the line, that I couldn't go through with it and ended up calling it all off. And that was hands down the hardest thing I've ever done, which is funny because, like I had anorexia twice that I recovered from. I watched my parents get divorced in my 20s and had to help them through it and had lots of kind of like difficult stuff. But that was, I think, the most humbling experience where it felt like my world and everything that I had built and everything that I knew had imploded from within. And the shame that I felt, that shame of, oh my goodness, I've been parading around on Instagram, showing off my wonderful life with him, feeling so happy, having this wedding, being so excited. And now what? Like now it's all over. And what now? And like truly, I was like breaking point depressed, like in such a dark place. And it had been COVID, right? So didn't have my family around, didn't have any friends around really.
Oh my gosh. All the support systems that help get through those challenging times.
Yeah, fully isolated. And it was really dark, like way darker than I thought. It was a complete kind of, not ego death, but like a crumbling of the ego structures that I knew. Yeah.
But I think also, and I think you mentioned this on our previous call, I think crumbling of everything you knew to be like success or everything you knew to be the vision of life that you were supposed to be working towards. And I think
100%.
like crumbling of identity, right? If I'm not this person checking these boxes, or if I'm not this person getting married, like who am I? And I think that is, humbling is a good word, and sort of dismantles so much in this like one swoop.
100%. Yeah, because at that point I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, I'm basically divorced. Like we owned a property together, so that had to go, and calling off the wedding and so much kind of like humiliation. And at that point, the darkness that I felt though was more of like, well, what do I do now? Because it never occurred to me that I could be in my early 30s and be alone in ostensibly a foreign country with, all my colleagues were in New York as well. I worked remotely. So it was just like, what do I do now? And I couldn't see the path ahead. And that was terrifying.
I know, because like you were on the path everybody told you were supposed to be on. And I don't think anyone until, recently where we're having more conversations. And I love what you said at the beginning of this is like, a lot of women go through this. A lot of women go through these, this fairy tale or story that is told to us doesn't happen for a majority of women. And I think that makes complete sense because no one talked to us like that there were even other paths. So it's like, I'm in no man's land. Like, where's the path? What's the path?
Totally. Right. And then, yeah, exactly. And I remember in my head, I kind of doing the math as well and thinking, okay, well, I'm probably going to be single for like a couple of years and healing. And then I might meet someone, but then I'm probably going to be dating them for a couple of years. And then we might, get engaged or get married if I can ever go through that again. And then, we're going to wait a couple of years and maybe have a kid. And in my head, like the timeline was so pushed far out. And the only comfort I really had, I remember, was talking to a couple of friends, like colleagues, work colleagues, who were in California at the time. And two of them were like, I was previously engaged. I called it off. It's not a big deal. And I was like, oh, wow, there are other people out there like this.
Yeah, the power in sharing your story, right? We're not alone. There are so many stories that look similar to ours. And of course, everybody's is unique in their own, but
100%.
Yeah, the beauty of sharing and normalizing
Yeah, it's like
Something that looks,
25% of engagements never go through. So
is
that
that
was
right?
really
75,
comforting.
is that right?
25, 25.
25. Wow. Well, 75.
Yeah, 25%.
25, but still a lot.
But yeah, so that was really like horrifying. But I will say one of the things that I'm so grateful for that experience was because it was so humbling and everything kind of cracked and imploded from within. It got to this point where, and then on top of that, like, other kind of disasters happened in my life, like my apartment flooded and blah, blah, like all this like rubbish just started
Oh
to
my
unfold.
gosh.
And I got COVID again. And anyway, but it kind of felt like, I'm at the lowest of the low. Like, I don't think it can get any lower. It did, because then Ukraine war started. My dad's in Ukraine. So that was like kind of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But what it did was it kind of shifted my perspective, because it felt like, well, this almost felt like an ego death. Not fully, but like, it felt like, what am I clinging on to now? I have nothing to cling on to. Like nothing really matters anymore, right? Because that image has gone. That's all crumbled. And so I'm kind of free now. I'm free to do whatever I want to do. Like, who cares? My reputation's in tatters anyway. Obviously it wasn't at all, but that was kind of the narrative in my head. And yeah, I ended up being very
sometimes too,
liberating.
it's like you mentioned, like the shame and humiliation, and one, people don't know the full story, right? People don't know what's happening internally. Two, a lot of times it's projection of their own discomfort. I think a lot of times people look at other people's situation and say, I didn't have the courage to end something that wasn't working well, so I'm going to project that. Or, I didn't have the courage to recognize I'm not happy. And I think a lot of times it's like people's discomfort with seeing someone go off the path is a huge, huge thing. And I think that's
100%.
what they project.
But like, I'm still fumbling along that path of my own right now. And it's definitely not linear, but it's really authentic, right? Because it's not linear, I don't really care anymore. Like, it feels very authentic. And, now I run my own business and I live in Ibiza, and I'm probably moving back to Canada. So I'm kind of going back and forth with my husband. We got married very early on into our relationship, and things unfolded very quickly.
Well, yeah, I want you to speak to that, because I think so many women, and I don't know if men do this, but I think, and maybe they do, so I don't want to generalize, but I think so many women, and me personally as well, can relate to the like math piece, like when you broke down the math of like, it'll take this many years to meet this person, and then we date for this many years. And it didn't work out that way for you. That math didn't add up that way. So I'd love for you to share that. But I think that's such a relatable piece we as women do, and we think about the timelines and the time and, the pressure of that. And I've certainly done math in my head that sounds similar to that. I'm still doing math in my head like that. So I'd love for you to speak to what it actually looked like, because it wasn't all of those years.
No, not at all. And I think even with the timelines that we do now, yes, there's like some real biological element to it. But at the same time, I really do believe in the power of the mind. And I do believe that time is kind of a figment of our imagination to an extent. But yeah, like, no, with me, after I called it all off, I did a mindfulness teacher training. So I threw myself into training to be an MBSR teacher, did like 3 months of meditating really intensely, like long days of meditation, which was incredibly healing, actually, because I kind of got to sit with my emotions. And I worked for a behavioral science company at the time, so I was very lucky that they didn't mind me taking that time to go and train to be a mindfulness teacher. So did that, and then I went into the rebounding phase, thinking, I didn't realize I was rebounding. I thought I was ready. I thought I was like ready and healed and good to go. I was not. And I probably spent a few months hanging out on Bumble, having horrible dates, getting more and more despairing.
Well, let's normalize that too. I think that's a lot of people's experiences.
Right. Yeah.
But the readiness is so important. And I relate to that a lot as well. Like, I was out dated before I met Rob. Like, I was out dating, doing my thing. And probably also, I had the fortunate experience of not having to use dating apps, because I was a bartender in New York City, and you just meet a plethora of people. But I always thought I was ready. And I was floored when one person I was hanging out with is like, you think you're so ready and so open. You're not. I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, and I relate to that, what you said about thinking you're ready, but you're not. And I think that brings up the interesting concept of time too, because I work with so many women that are just, racing against this clock, and they will continue to like push themselves and go on all these dates. Yeah. And the anxiety around the time sort of motivates that and this idea of like wasting time, like they don't want to pause from dating because it'll
Yeah.
be like a waste of time, when in reality, if you took a month or two to really take care of
Oh,
yourself.
I can talk to that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk to that, because I think a lot of
Yeah.
women can relate to that. And again, I've had so many clients that just perpetually date and can't give themselves that permission to take the pause because
Yeah.
they feel like it's a waste of time.
100%. So yeah, I actually remember being, and I've written about this before in like, I think a blog, but I left Canada, I left Vancouver. I was living in London, and I thought going back to London, where, you know, I kind of grew up, would be better for for the dating scene. And I was out there and I was dating, and I was lucky enough, I was earning a really good salary. So I lived in a good neighborhood, and yeah, I had like everything going for me. And I remember coming home and having weekends, it's being like, I feel wretched. I don't know what's wrong with me. Obviously, again, like, you know, Ukraine war and stuff was still going on in the background. So there was stuff going on, but I was doing tons of therapy. I was, again, because I could afford it, I was doing tons of therapy and tons of self-work. And I was working for an even more rigorous positive psychology company. So I was like deep in psychology. And then my mom came over, and I remember just having a complete breakdown to her, being like, I cannot find anyone. And my mom was saying, she was like, Kat, it's been like 6 months since you called off your engagement. Like, it's fine. Take a break. It's like, just take a little pause on it. You're pushing too hard. And I remember thinking like, I can't, you don't understand. I can't. And like,
you did the math, all the math told you it would take. And you couldn't.
And I was like, I can't, I simply can't. And then I remember my therapist telling me the same thing. And I was like, I hate you all. I don't want to do it. Like, I'm going to keep going.
I hate you all, but you're right.
Right. But so in the end, I did decide to take a month off. I took a month off. And in that month, I went to Ibiza. I came back to Ibiza, where I am now. I had kind of a few little epiphanies of, you know, I think I want to rehaul my life, and I want to quit corporate, and I think I want to train in the coaching and psychology space. And then, so I came on my own, and that felt very liberating. And I threw my all into like healing in a way that I hadn't done before, in the sense of, without the distraction of dating, I really focused on embodying everything that I already knew, right? I'd have done tons of reading. Like, I knew so much behavioral science because of my work, because of all the investment I'd made into this part of my life, but I hadn't really embodied it. I'd been kind of like rushing through it and understanding it cognitively.
That's interesting.
Right? Like classic high achiever. I was like, yeah, I know everything. Like, I followed every Instagram coach. I listened to every podcast. I read every book. I like had like little quotes like stored on my phone, and did therapy like twice a week. Like, I felt like I felt like a know-it-all, which I see with some of my clients, right? Like, I was like, I know everything. But it was when I kind of took my foot off the gas and started to really practice embodying it and slowing down and looking even deeper and kind of listening to my gut and seeing what was coming up and really practicing what I kind of knew. And I'm not even joking, but within 4 weeks, I met my husband. And I'm not saying that to be
I believe it wholeheartedly. And I love what you said about taking your foot off the gas, because I think it's very hard, or can be very hard, to do that, especially in a place like New York City, especially like a lot of women that I work with are similar to you, very high achieving, very smart, very ambitious. And the permission to slow down is really quite hard, because one, it's internally driven, but also it's environmentally driven. And then you add in all these timelines or milestones or boxes we're supposed to check. And it's really hard to do what you did. But I love that you're sharing that, because there's so much value in taking your foot off the gas. And even, you know, I shared with you kind of where I'm at personally, and I have an episode coming out next week about all that. But, that's resonating so hard with me right now, because I need to hear that message too, to take my foot off the gas. Yeah.
And it's not like it just works for me, right? Like, I now teach the method, all the behavioral science, all the different modalities and therapies and tools and techniques that I was really going hard on. I now teach that in my methodology to my clients. And the same thing happens. I've got like clients who are 57, right? And they've been going hard all their lives. And now that they start working with me, and they tell me, they're like, I'm actually consciously not going to be dating whilst I work with you. And when we do one-on-one, it's only 3 months. But then they meet someone when they're not even trying. I know,
but that's like how so much stuff happens the second you take your foot off the gas, the second you take the pressure off of it.
Mm-hmm.
it just sort of, it comes to you without you having to force it.
Yeah. And I will actually add a caveat to that. Like, yes, it does. And at the same time, you have to be ready to see it and receive it, right? Because
Yes.
that's the
Yes.
thing about inner work. I was doing a lot of talking about inner work today. Like, this isn't about start being lazy and not do anything. This isn't about assuming that I know it all, because I didn't know it all. When I took that break to do deep, deep, deep inner work. The break was because I was focusing on myself, not because I wasn't focusing on dating. I remember years ago, people would say like, love will find you when you're not looking for it, when you least expect it. And I remember thinking like, but how? If I want a partner, if I want to get married, I don't think there's a single day that goes by as a single person where I'm not scanning the room, where I'm not like
Right.
checking my phone, where I'm not going into a bar and like thinking, oh, could the one be here? Like, I think it's very unreasonable to expect anyone to just turn that switch off and not be out there looking for it. And what I realized when I took my break was that it's not that I wasn't looking for it. Of course I wanted it. I was open to it. I was ready for it. I was ready to receive it. And at the same time, I was kind of holding this kind of shape in my body where I was open to it, and my awareness and my attention was still in on myself and being with myself and befriending myself and soothing myself. And I was kind of very grounded and centered within myself whilst being open. And I was doing that inner work on myself whilst being open, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And, obviously there was a wonderful result from that, but I love what you said. It isn't about pausing anything. That's what's so hard about the narrative of wasting time and reshaping that framework, that you're not wasting time. You're actually probably doing something more valuable. And sometimes what I've said to clients, it's like more of a waste of time to like go on all these dates, scan the room, scan the bar, if you're not ready to receive, if you're not,
100%.
because, the perfect person for you could be right in front of your face. But if you haven't done all the work, and if you're not aware or ready to see, you'll miss them. You'll miss them completely.
Completely. And 100%. Like, even again, one of my clients, he was telling me how he's like, there are no women in my city. Everyone says that. Everyone thinks they're in the wrong city, right? But
oh my gosh, that's come up a lot in my work too. It's like, I'm gonna move somewhere else.
Yeah. Trust me, I've lived in like 8 different countries. It doesn't change. I ended up meeting my husband like in my home city, and he was traveling through. So, but yeah, no, like he was saying there are no women in my city, and now the woman that he's like, Kat, I think she's my life partner. Her son lives like half an hour away, and they've had common connections. They probably grew up together in school. They're now realizing, and he's like, this is very trippy. He was like, what have you done? This is really trippy. Yeah.
Well, maybe this is a good time, because there are some other personal things I want to talk about, and you have your own journey with egg freezing, but we've been talking about your work a little bit. So maybe that's a good transition to talk a little bit about your work and sort of how you came to relationship work. Because I found what you shared with me on our previous call, like sort of this discovery through your work previously before shifting, was that everybody is lonely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the background context is kind of like two things, like my professional background's in behavioral science, and the wine industry. I was in the wine trade before. Random, like, first career.
I love that though. But you know what? That's the thing about going off the path, is like you find yourself doing so many different things and meeting different people and having all these different experiences. I just love that about not being on this, like, and not that that can't be experienced if you're on the more like linear, path. But I think, I've done a million different jobs too. And it's so fun to kind of think about all those different experiences.
Yeah, it is super fun. 100%. And I actually like integrate wine with some of my dating coaching now, because I'm like, why not? Why wouldn't you be drinking wine whilst you're doing this? Anyway, but yeah, so I worked in behavioral science more recently, learning a lot about positive psychology, learning a lot about how do you drive behavioral change, learning all the different models. And again, it was really interesting. I love that world. And in tandem to that, my academic background has always been around gender. So looking at what does it mean to inhabit the body of a woman? What does it mean to identify as a masculine male? Like, what is masculine? What is femininity? What are the different gender roles? And so I've been studying that my entire academic life and super passionate about it, and really looking at where do we entrap ourselves? Where do we limit ourselves, right? Like, where do we live?
Speak to that. Yeah.
2-dimensional models of who we are. And I specialized in masculinity, but I also looked at like women and the body and what it means to inhabit the feminine body or the women's body. So that was kind of another big part. And when I left behavioral science to build my own coaching practice, which really I did as a side gig when I was traveling, and I began coaching executives and founders and people in my network, people from my Oxford alumni group, who a lot of them are founders. And they're all kind of very high achieving people. They're all, really go-getting. And as I began coaching them, and I would typically have like a 3 to 6 month engagement. Mm-hmm. And over time, we would get deeper and deeper and deeper into the work, obviously. And what I would find is that they were lonely. There was a lot of loneliness. And that loneliness would either manifest as, I'm working so hard, I don't have time to find a life partner. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm so anxious and I'm so kind of like high achieving and chasing approval that I'm so afraid of rejection, I don't even want to go there. Wow. Or they were already in a marriage or a relationship and they're really questioning, am I with the right person? But they can't leave. And so, as I began to see all of that, I kind of would informally dive into it, bringing in a lot of the knowledge and the work that I've done.
Yeah, how could you not, right? If you see that coming up, how could you not dive into it?
Exactly. And because a lot of my own personal experience was obviously kind of navigating. I did a lot of marriage counseling with my ex. So I had my own personal journey in that. And I'm really into working with the body and somatics. And so I was doing so much work with them informally. And it was funny because they kept coming back for more of the relationship coaching, which I was like, this is really weird. What am I doing? I'm an executive coach. And my own coach at the time, I remember telling her, and she was like, why aren't you a relationship coach? This is clearly your passion. You're passionate about the gender dynamics. You're passionate about the behavioral science of connecting, of creating, inclusive relationships and all of these things. Why are you doing executive coaching? And I was like, because I'm scared. I'm too scared to go out there, and I was like, I don't want to be a dating coach. Like my parents would kill me. And I was like, what will my corporate employers think? Like, what will they think?
Like, right, these external voices and these external narratives about what we should do and what we shouldn't do.
I was so scared. And I remember when I kind of started like pivoting to relationship coaching on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh my God. And my engagement went down. Definitely. I think that I lost people who were very vocal about my work before, which makes sense because that's when I realized people really are afraid of talking about this stuff, especially high achieving executives and entrepreneurs, people who have to carry themselves like they've got everything put together because so much hinges on them having it all put together, that to actually reveal that they're struggling and they're vulnerable and they feel lonely and they feel isolated and they're burning out, right? Is like too much. And that's what made me even more passionate of heck, I'm going to come out here and talk about it till the cows come home, because it's ridiculous that there are so many brilliant, intelligent, wonderful people who want to do good in the world who are carrying such loneliness.
I know. And I believe, and, maybe people won't share this belief, but I don't think there's any amount of success that replaces connection and deep connection and being loved and being, cared for. I think there's no amount of success that is a trade-off for not having that.
No, 100%, right? 100%. And the reason I kind of focused on this demographic is I know for myself, when I was doing the marriage counseling, when I was working with my own coaches back in the day, a lot of the feedback that I had was that the problem, or my problem, quote unquote, was that I am too ambitious, I work too hard, I'm too driven. And all of these traits, these kind of quote unquote masculine traits.
Yes, I want to ask. Okay, yeah, I want to get into that.
Terrifying anyway. And also burning me out. And I remember being like, I'm not burning out though. Like, I'm full of energy. I love my work. Like, I'm so energized by my work. And just the fact that I'm a hard worker and I work fast and I'm ambitious, like, why is that being held against me? And why I was gaslighting myself for so long that there's something wrong with me. And so then when I started working with more high achievers, I was like, we all feel a little bit kind of, I had one client, she was a very successful female founder, and she was like, yeah, it's really lonely at the top. She's like, I've climbed to the top, and now she's like, I'm up here and it's lonely and I feel kind of judged for being up here. And she's like, I don't want to be lonely up here. She's like, I want to love and connect. And so my point is, like, I found that a lot of the solutions and remedies weren't really resonating or that applicable to a certain demographic of people, right? And so that's really what made me want to focus on them, because I'm like, I get it. I come from that same mindset. But also, I'm going to integrate science. I'm going to be very rigorous about methodology. I'm going to create a clear container around what we're doing together, so that this doesn't feel like another kind of fluffy, woo-woo, like, no offense, but like more kind of Instagram coachy feel, of which there's tons of stuff out there. But actually, I'm going to bring a coherent methodology. It's going to be rooted in science. We're going to have a clear end and beginning to the program. You're going to be with a cohort of other like-minded, successful professionals. You're not going to feel alone. There's not going to be any shame here, because actually you're going to connect and see that the problems are all the same.
Right. That other people are experiencing the same thing as you.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give you and teach you the tools and techniques so that you can become your own master. And then you don't have to go and depend on other people and keep paying out of pocket to get help. And actually, you are smart and you can help yourself. You just need to know how.
Yeah,
And
applying probably
right?
some of the same characteristics, qualities, work ethic to their profession as their personal life,
Exactly.
and finding success there.
Exactly.
I'm really curious to talk about, because sort of the masculinity, femininity conversation, because we had a guest on here and it sparked this thought because of what you said about how ambitious you were and how hard you worked. And, you know, you're talking about that with your therapist. We had a male dating coach on here that talked about that, and talked about that what men are looking for are more feminine women, and women that nurture and take care of. And I think that message is hard for some women to hear, because, you know, especially a lot of women that listen here are very ambitious or very high achieving, like similar, you know, I had a coach healer say to me that like my masculinity is at odds with Rob's masculinity. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, because how is there space for both, for women to be, you know, in masculine energy, to be successful in careers, but also desired by men that are looking for a more nurturing feminine person?
Yeah. And I have such a problem with that. And it kind of boils down to, if we called the masculine energy, well, I'll take a step back actually. I see it, there are kind of like three buckets of things going on, right? You have your biological sex. That's your anatomy, what you were born with. And actually, there are more than two sexes. That's been proven already. Just in our Anglo-American society, we kind of say that there's like man and woman, which is false. But anyway, so you have your two sexes, and then you have your gender identity, which is really what you learn essentially to become. If I'm going to go quite extreme, it's like performativity. It's like what you choose to perform. And I say that because I grew up as, you know, a little bit of a tomboy. I loved, right? I love climbing trees and like sports and like climbing mountains.
Oh my gosh, same, yes.
Yeah. And it was only later in life when I went to a girls' school that I was like, okay, I kind of began to soften a little bit and adopt more kind of feminine qualities. Anyhow, so you have your gender identity, and then you have the two energies, right? And the two energies, every single human being has a blend of both energies. And we can call those energies whatever we want. Like they can go under the name of yin and yang. I literally call them like energy A and energy B. They don't have any signifying like notion about your identity. They're just energies that we have. One energy is more about consciousness and discipline and structure and doing, and the other energy is more about emotion, love, expression, movement, right? It's kind of like light and dark. They're just kind of opposites. They're just energies that we have. And you see it in nature. You have it all over nature. You have the night and day. You see it within living organisms. Like we all have both energies. And at the same time, when we think about our Anglo-American society, we don't have a language to call these energies. We call them masculine and feminine. And that's where it gets really problematic, because we don't have enough language. And so by default, it becomes like, well, the masculine man is associated with the masculine energy and the feminine woman has a feminine energy. But actually, when you take it to its logical extreme, that's when you have toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, because it's a very two-dimensional notion of a human. Like the unintegrated, unhealthy, toxic masculine doesn't have any of his feminine energy. He doesn't have any emotion. He doesn't have any expression. All he has is anger, because that's the only emotion that he's allowed to express. Right? And the same with the toxic feminine. She's like a damsel in distress, like a little princess who can't manage her finances, can't provide for herself, can't really have structure in her life. So she's very dependent, very infantile. And so the healthy, integrated, conscious human being has both. And the beauty of when you have both, final thing I'll say, is that you then get to play around with the energies, right? You then get to decide, like, okay, if I identify as a straight woman and I identify as, a female, I might want to play with the feminine energy more because I do live in this kind of gender society. I'm going to have fun with it. And at the same time, if I need to go more into my masculine energy, because actually I need to go pay the bills, or actually my husband's sick and I need to take care of him, and actually I need to maybe look after his work, or I need to provide, I can, right?
I love
Sorry, that was a big round. But
no, I love that. I love this idea because, it's a concept I always use in therapy, is that you can hold space for more than one thing at a time, right? You
100%.
can feel happy and sad, and it's the permission to do that. I think so often where we get in trouble is not giving ourselves permission to hold two things, whether that's two energies or two emotions. So I love the way that you broke that down.
Yeah.
So interesting. I at the end, you have to share where everybody can find you, because I'm sure people are going to be dying to work with you. I want to shift back to some more personal journey conversation. And I would love if you could share your egg freezing journey, because we do talk about that a lot on this podcast.
Yeah, sure. So when I met my husband, I didn't think at all that there was anything fertility related. I was aware that I was like, I did lose. I had a few years of my life with my ex, and I was also younger then. And yeah, it was really because I worked for that positive psychology.
That's interesting, the little slip you just had there.
I know, right?
Yeah. But everything's in the right again, because everything is in the context of time. Or we can put everything in the context of time and looking that at. But it's interesting because the way you have shared your story with me, I think that relationship was so important to where it got you and how it did break you open and did
100%
you, like, on this place to find a more authentic self.
100%. And I'm so grateful that it happened, truly, because I don't think I would have been ready to be with my husband had I not gone through all of that. Truly, I think I wouldn't have been ready at all. But when I met him, I decided, like, a few months later, to do a fertility test on the back of, finding out that my friends were doing some. And I was really shocked to find out that my egg count was lower than I thought it would be. It wasn't like terminal or anything, but it was just lower. And the kind of nervous breakdown that I had.
Yeah.
And then
because you don't expect that. I'm sure you didn't, you don't expect that. You just think you're going to take the test and everything will look normal
fine,
for your age. I have so many women that avoid doing that test because for the fear of hearing something they don't want to hear.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the sense of failure I felt was so intense. Again, high achiever, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, I failed as a woman and blah, blah, blah. And I really spiraled. And at the same time, I remember telling my partner at the time, my now husband, and that's when we got really close because we'd only been together for like 4 months. And basically we both decided to freeze an embryo. We were like, egg freezing is not that reliable, blah, 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 let's freeze an embryo. And so we went on this journey where we looked at the price of getting it done.
So
horrible price. Yes. We both quit our corporate jobs. So we were like, probably not the best use of our money right now, given that obviously this isn't terminal. And we've only been together for 4 months. So we traveled around. We ended up going to Slovakia, where I was born, to kind of my original hometown, and doing it there. And the first round, I got to the point of doing the injections. And it was like, I think it was like a few days before I was due for the operation, and they found a cyst. So they couldn't continue. Yes, I was gutted. I didn't even know that was a thing that could happen. Absolutely gutted. Again,
that's so interesting. Well, I mean, again, I think there's this gap of knowledge and information.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Why weren't you informed that was potentially an outcome?
And also, like, even before that point, why did no one tell us that egg freezing isn't that easy and it's not a guarantee, right? Like,
I know it is really sold as like this insurance policy. And I still advocate for it 100%. I think women should get their fertility checked. I think women should freeze their eggs if that's accessible to them. But I think the information needs to be more holistic and like,
for sure.
It's not 100% insurance policy.
Yeah.
And it is not easy emotionally, physically, financially at all.
For sure. 100%. Like, again, I was lucky that the price wasn't too brutal over there. But again, after one kind of failed round, it was like, well, we spent a lot of money on the drugs and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, that was kind of devastating. And then I didn't want to try again straight after. So we went traveling, because we were still traveling the world and figuring out where we want to live, and went to Colombia and blah, blah, blah. And it was amazing. But it was kind of in the back of my mind of like, oh, I still want to freeze some eggs. I still want to freeze some eggs. Can I drink wine? Can I,
all those questions. Yes.
Yeah. And I remember that the doctor in Slovakia, she was really good. She was like, the more you can relax and enjoy your life, the better. So she was like, stop worrying, stop caring, just make sure you exercise. Yeah. She was like, go exercise, go drink your wine, go have fun, focus on being happy. So I came back in July and I tried again, and the same thing happened. Literally like 12 days of injections, and then, same thing. That was brutal. At that point, I was like, I actually had told myself I'm not going to try again after that. But then I was like, oh, maybe I'll try one more time. And so went on and had a summer. And then in November, here in Ibiza, gave it one more go. I actually wasn't even planning to do it. I went to the clinic just to get a test.
Mm-hmm.
And my account hadn't gone down at all. Like, it was actually gone up. I don't understand how it gone up. Like,
maybe because you were relaxed and having fun and enjoying your life. I mean, I really think that contributes. Something
happened, right? And I was taking like Indonal and like a few of the kind of, whatever you call them, supplements. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it's called over there in the US, but I was doing a few supplements, but I wasn't really taking that rigorous care. And then, in November, they were just like, okay, so when are you going to start? And I was like, am I going to do this again? I guess I am. They're very kind of coercive there. So sure. Unfortunately, in Spain, you can't freeze an embryo unless you commit prior and prepay to use it for IVF. And at that point, I was like, I don't know if I actually want, I don't even know if I even want kids. Because you know what's funny? Like, after doing the 2 rounds of the egg freezing, my desire to have children just went down. Like, honestly, it went down, because I was like, my body feels brutal. I feel hormonal. There was like a couple of days where I cried for like 48 hours. It's like, I'm crying. I don't feel well. I'm really not handling the kind of the process very well. And again, my husband kept saying, he was like, if this is what pregnancy is going to be like, he's like, I don't want it. Like, I want you being happy. I want you being relaxed. I want you, being free. And I kind of felt similar though. I was like, I still want to do it. I still want to do it. And 3rd round wasn't so bad. Like, it actually was, like, it was still uncomfortable, but it wasn't so bad. And it did work. It finally worked.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And got it done. When I found out that I had enough eggs for like 1 round of IVF, I was like, are you joking? In my head, I thought it was like,
I know, but again, it's like all these, we kind of go into these things, and hopefully this is like improving, but we go into these things with not all the information, right? Or not clear understanding of what it all means.
Yeah, I was so shocked. But I was still like, I'm happy it's done. It is my little insurance policy. They're now in Mallorca, across the water from here. And and obviously I'm moving back to Canada in August. So my eggs are
going to gosh, you are. Because when we spoke, okay, you guys have a date. And okay, wow.
Yeah, it's not official. Like, we haven't gone out to the public, apart from now we have.
Oh, okay. Well, this will probably come out after you guys move.
Yeah, no. It's cool. But yeah, we've decided to, for many reasons, partly like if we did want to have a family, if we did want to have like a normal life, it's a bit more normal than living in Ibiza. And I love Ibiza with all my heart. It's just kind of from like a work-life balance perspective.
Yeah. I need to go back there because I told you my story about Ibiza.
You did, yeah.
I'll share once I have time, but I need a redo.
Yeah. But so, I'm happy I did it. I am happy I did it. And you know what? I probably in like a year or a year and a half, I wouldn't be opposed to doing it again if it would make sense. But it has also made me think like, the doctors were like, if you want to have kids, you should really have them within the next year or 2 to have your natural birth. And I hear that and I'm just like, oh, yes, I do want them, but I'm also not ready. And the more relationship coaching that I do, the more I lean into the side of like, here I am doing this relationship coaching. I'm helping everyone else build their incredible relationships, because I do marriage like coaching as well. And, clients get incredible results and I see them glowing. And I think about my own relationship and I'm like, we're tired.
Yeah, you guys have had, we didn't get into it here, but you guys have had a lot go on. But what I love about your relationship and what we talked about on our previous call is that the chaos is external.
Yeah,
It's just, you guys have dealt with a lot of like external stuff, but internally as a foundation, you guys are so strong, which has allowed you to
100%. Yeah. And
manage.
I kind of want to honor that, right? Like that's kind of where there's the feeling of, I've had so many friends have babies and walk me through how difficult it is, and the postpartum depression and just like how challenging it can be. And I see that and I'm kind of like, I don't want to jeopardize our relationship. Not yet. Not yet. I want to have more time with him to just relax and enjoy our lives and go hiking and do all the things that we love to do and go party and be silly. And then if the time is right, have our own or adopt. And if not, that's also fine, because the final thing I'll say is like, and I tell this to my female clients who are in their 40s, like, I am such a firm believer as a feminist that there are so many models of motherhood that we can have.
And I'm glad you're going here, because this is exactly where I wanted to go. And there were a few things that you had said on our previous call that are important to talk about here. And that's being one of them. And I love your decision to be on your own timeline, to focus on yourself, to focus on your relationship. And, I think there are some really great doctors out there, but I don't love sort of those blanket statements of like, or those black and white statements of like, you have to do it in one or 2 years. I think there's just more to this story than that. So I love that you're still like staying grounded in your own timeline, your own desires, what's best for you in your life. But yes, I do want to talk about what you shared on a previous call, two things, like the motherhood piece, and also just to normalize the not knowing whether or not you want to be a mother, or choosing not to be a mother at all.
100%. And it's funny because I have so many friends who aren't mothers, and it's really normal in my circle of like fierce, entrepreneurial, smart, high achieving women. Plenty don't. And some of my friends don't because of like medical issues. But I think the world doesn't need more children. We know that. That's kind of like a fact, right? Plenty of kids need adopting. That's another fact. And then also, there are so many critical issues in the world that we have to channel a motherhood energy to. The planet's on fire. It needs saving, right? Someone's going to have to do that. I don't know what's happened to me, but as I've got older, I've become really into like helping animals. I don't know what's happened. It's got to a weird point. Like my heart melts.
That's that nurturing, right? That's another form of mothering. And I love that you brought that up on our last call. It's like, again, like just like this creating this expansive vision that motherhood doesn't have to just be children.
No.
We had an amazing guest on, this woman, Sharni, and she had her own like fertility journey, but has really come to this incredible, amazing place that she's like, I think I'm meant to mother and mentor women. I think this is what and she's loves her life. And another thing you said on our call is, either path can be equally wonderful. And I think it's just about, expanding the vision.
100%. Right. And there's also something like, I come from a lineage of Eastern European women. I'm Eastern European. And I think for me, again, intuitively, when I've meditated on this and sat with it, I have such a really strong, fierce cry for like freedom. And yeah, there is a part of me that wants to have children, of course. And there's another part of me that's like, you know what? Generations of women haven't had freedom because actually having a child has entrapped them, right? Financially, it's been hard because of patriarchal systems. And so there's a kind of I don't know if it's like a generation. It's interesting because my cousins also don't want to have kids. And I wonder if we've kind of got some like intergenerational break that we're doing here. Not to say that I don't. I wonder if when I'm in Canada and I'm in Vancouver and I'm more relaxed and, my husband's got a job that he loves, I wonder if then it'll kick in. And I do admit I have a fear of what if I worry that it's too late. And at the same time, so woo-woo, but I do believe everything happens for a reason. And I do believe that our like role is to be so connected to ourselves that we are just being as authentic as we can be in the moments that we have, right? Without trying to project into the future, without being pressured by outside influences. But like at this point in time, do you want a child? Like in my case, I'm like, well, no, right now I don't. Okay. All right. Do you think you will in a few years? I don't know. Okay. Like, but
being comfortable with being comfortable for yourself with those answers. And I think that's the work, is to get to a place to be able to answer those authentically, but also comfortably and really believe them. Like, I am okay and I can own that. Right. And a lot of that can be, drowning out that external noise that is telling you, you should, and this is the age, or the doctor that's saying you should do it in the next year or two. Well, but that doesn't line up with my life or my timeline.
100%. 100%. And again, like if you want to be nerdy, I mean, when I got the bad news about the egg freezing, I had a bath crying. And then I spent the whole evening like Googling stats and data and science and like happiness levels. Right.
Oh,
and what I found,
interesting.
because it's funny, that's the first thing I looked at, right? It was like, does your happiness level go up or down when you have kids? What they found was that generally speaking, marriage does increase your happiness levels. In Scandinavian countries, your happiness does go up very marginally, like it's like literally in the percentages if you have a child. But in North America, it goes down when you have kids. I imagine because of like the social welfare system, it's not that great.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we have no support for parents, for mothers. Like daycare is very expensive. Yeah, I mean, there's just no support here or good support in that way. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. And then, in Scandinavian countries, it's much more well-resourced. So I remember when I read that and I was like, interesting. Like there's no kind of, again, I think if we grew up in a village with a community.
Well, right. And that's the way it was meant to be done. Right. And that's the reason there's a saying, it takes a village, because it really does. And
100%.
I had so much angst about my own timeline and, whether or not I would be a mother, and then having my son at 40. And then, like you said, everything happens for a reason. Sometimes we don't know that reason until we arrive there. I think the work is trusting that we will arrive there. But having my son at 40 makes so much sense to me now, because I'm just in a place personally, professionally, financially, where I don't feel entrapped, but I have resources, right? And I am so patient with him and I enjoy it. And so for me, that timeline worked out beautifully. So I don't feel that entrapment, but I also had a lot of time to grow into the person I am now, to grow into a place where I can, have amazing resources that makes it very helpful and enjoyable. But I know that's not everybody's situation.
No, 100%. I mean, you're spot on, right? Like I have a similar kind of hunch that if I do decide to have kids, it will be later in life, should my body want to go ahead with that. And again, adoption is always a thing. It's a very needed thing.
Yeah. And, I think the message is we can build a life that we desire, and our life 100%. Can look any way that we want it to. And sort of just the power of getting really clear on what that looks like based on what we want authentically. And I tell that to, my clients that, are not sure what they want, or like, well, it could be anything that you want. And really kind of figuring out what that is hard. I have so many clients who will say, it sounds like a simple question, but it's not. It's like, what do you want? And then we're so confused and we're so unclear about that, because we've had all these messages for so long telling us that we should want one thing. And then when internally that's not lining up, it creates so much chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if we've been fighting for anything all these centuries and millennia, it's really to have the freedom to choose, right?
The freedom to choose. Yeah. I love that. Well, this was an amazing conversation. I could talk to you for hours about all of this stuff, so much more to get into. I definitely want you to share where everybody can find you, and if you are taking on new clients, or what it would be to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I am taking on new clients for my group program. It is a very small and intimate little group, and it's ongoing. So there's no kind of rush to join, apart from the inevitable price point increase. It's like the group fills up. And it is a 6-month program where we go through the 3 core phases that we will have to go through in order to find healthy, secure love. And I can talk more about that if you reach out to me. You can find me on KatarinaPolonska.com. There's actually a free training on my website as well.
Oh, great.
Methodology. Okay. Yeah, so KatarinaPolonska.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Katarina Polonsky with a Y, or Instagram at Katarina Polonska.
Yes, go check out her stuff. It's so amazing. And so thank you so much for being here and sharing your story, your personal story, and your work. Your work sounds amazing and incredibly helpful to so many people.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If you like the episodes that you're hearing and you want to hear more, please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more incredible stories and tools.
When I froze my eggs at 37, I felt alone, I felt unsure, I felt confused and uncertain. And when you're considering such a big decision, feeling those ways do not feel good. So we have created a step-by-step guide to egg freezing so no one else has to feel that way. If you are considering egg freezing, if you're curious about what the process looks like or what you should be thinking about, then this guide is for you. We were really thoughtful in how we put it together. I think it's a great guide. I think it's really comprehensive and covers a lot of the things to be thinking about, to be considering, and maybe some things you didn't even realize you should be thinking about or considering. The goal is to not have anyone feel alone in this journey. So if you're thinking about this decision, sign up through our website, quiettheclock.com, and make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at quiettheclockpod. This is a very big decision, so I don't want anyone to feel alone in it. So if you're thinking about it, grab this guide, and you can also DM me with any questions. I'm here to support you through this decision and this journey.